Breaking, Prince William just shattered 300 years of royal protocol with 5 words that could bring down Keir Starmer's government before Christmas. Westminster is in absolute meltdown. Cabinet ministers are plotting resignation. And what happened in the last 60 minutes has left Downing Street scrambling in a state of complete panic. If you want to see how this constitutional earthquake ends, hit that subscribe button right now, because what we're about to reveal will shock you to your core. Here's what sparked the crisis that's tearing Britain apart. At 2:47 p.m. yesterday, Prince William attended what should have been a routine veterans charity event at the Imperial War Museum in London. His speech was supposed to be safe, non-political, the usual royal fare. But William wasn't playing it safe. He was planning something that would detonate across British politics like a nuclear bomb. The trigger was Starmer's announcement just 72 hours earlier, slashing veterans' housing support by £340 million, while simultaneously approving £2.1 billion in foreign aid increases. The cuts were brutal and specific. Over 12,000 veterans would lose housing assistance by March. Support for mental health services for former soldiers was reduced by 38%. Meanwhile, foreign aid to countries with documented corruption problems increased by £840 million. But William wasn't staying silent. The future king was about to break every rule in the royal playbook. According to palace insiders who spoke on condition of anonymity, William had been building to this moment for months, watching veterans suffer while politicians talked, and his patience had finally run out. Standing before 300 veterans, many in their 70s and 80s, men who had served in the Falklands, Iraq, Afghanistan and Northern Ireland, William delivered words that will be studied for decades. His exact words were chilling. Looking directly into the television cameras, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion, William said, "When those who serve this nation with courage are left struggling while others receive support without question, we must ask ourselves what kind of country we've become." The hall erupted. Veterans rose to their feet. The applause thundered for 90 seconds. Some veterans were crying openly, their medals gleaming under the lights, their faces showing years of frustration, finally validated by royal acknowledgement. But here's what made it devastating. William didn't stop there. He continued. His jaw set, his eyes hard, and witnesses say they had never seen the normally composed prince so visibly angry. Leadership means making choices that honour sacrifice, not abandon it. 5 words in that sentence destroyed Starmer's credibility, not abandon it. A direct accusation from the future king that the Prime Minister had abandoned Britain's heroes. The room fell silent after the applause died. Everyone understood they had just witnessed history, a future monarch declaring war on a sitting government. Within minutes, the footage was everywhere. Within an hour, Downing Street was in complete chaos, and within 3 hours, Starmer's political survival was in serious doubt. The response was swift and absolutely devastating. Starmer's press team scrambled to issue a statement, but the damage was already catastrophic. While Prince William stood with veterans who had given everything for Britain, Starmer was hosting a champagne reception for climate activists at number 10. The optics were so brutal, so utterly tone-deaf, that even Labour MPs were texting each other in horror. A Prime Minister sipping champagne with protesters who had never served a day in their lives, while the future king publicly humiliated him for abandoning those who served decades. The guest list at Starmer's reception, leaked to the Daily Mail, included Just Stop Oil organisers, Extinction Rebellion activists and climate lobbyists who had previously called for defunding the military entirely. The contrast couldn't have been more politically toxic. One Labour MP, speaking anonymously to the BBC, said it felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. "We all knew it was bad optics," the MP admitted, but nobody expected the palace to go nuclear like this. Meanwhile, British veterans who fought in Iraq, Afghanistan and the Falklands are being evicted from temporary housing. James Morrison, a 71-year-old Falklands veteran from Portsmouth, was given 30 days' notice to vacate his council flat. His monthly pension barely covers food. His housing support, slashed by Starmer's cuts, means he's facing homelessness by January. I lost mates in the South Atlantic, Morrison told reporters, his voice breaking. I served this country for 24 years and now I'm being thrown on the streets while illegal migrants get 4-star hotels. Morrison's story went viral within hours. Over 400,000 people shared his interview across social media platforms, but he's not alone. Sarah Collins, a 54-year-old Royal Navy veteran who served in the Gulf War, is living in her car after losing her housing support. I gave 6 years to this country, she said, tears streaming down her face during a Sky News interview. I came home with PTSD. I've been fighting for support for 15 years and now they're taking away the one thing keeping me off the streets. Her interview was viewed 3.2 million times in 18 hours. The contrast is so sickening, so morally bankrupt, that even lifelong Labour voters are abandoning the party in disgust. Britain spends £8 million per day housing asylum seekers in hotels, while 6,000 veterans are homeless on any given night, according to charity estimates. Then something unprecedented happened. King Charles, watching his son's intervention from Balmoral, did something no monarch has done in modern history. At 4:15 p.m, just 90 minutes after William's speech, Charles authorised a statement from Buckingham Palace that shattered every rule of royal neutrality. Issued through the King's private secretary, it read, His Majesty shares the deep concerns expressed by the Prince of Wales regarding our sacred duty to those who have served. Sacred duty. Those two words were not chosen by accident. At a state dinner later that evening, witnesses say Charles delivered another chilling signal. When Starmer approached to shake hands, the King's greeting was ice cold. No warmth, no smile, just a perfunctory handshake lasting exactly 2 seconds. Royal protocol demands at least 10. Photographers captured the moment. Body language experts are calling it the most hostile royal political interaction in decades. The atmosphere was described as excruciatingly tense, with the King avoiding Starmer entirely throughout the 3-hour dinner. The domino effect was catastrophic. Markets panicked. The pound dropped 1.2% against the dollar. £18 billion was wiped from the London Stock Exchange. Within hours, ministers resigned. By the next morning, 5 had gone, including the Veterans Affairs Minister, who wrote, I joined this government to help veterans not oversee their abandonment. Social media erupted. Protests broke out across Britain. Veterans laid their medals on the steps of Parliament in silent protest. Inside Number 10, panic reigned. Cabinet meetings dissolved into shouting matches. WhatsApp groups buzzed with talk of leadership challenges. Senior MPS openly discussed timelines to remove Starmer. Polls collapsed. Labour support cratered among older voters and military families. Reform UK surged. Conservatives seized the moment, and leaked emails now suggest Starmer was warned in advance about William's speech and chose to ignore it. Britain now stands on the brink of a constitutional crisis not seen since 1936, a prime minister at war with the monarchy, a government fracturing from within, a nation divided over its most sacred values. At the centre stands Keir Starmer, increasingly isolated, increasingly desperate, and increasingly finished. So the question is simple. Does Starmer survive this? Or is his career over by Christmas? Will Prince William intervene again? And could this crisis bring down the entire Labour government? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story shocked you, share it with everyone who needs to see what's really happening in Westminster right now. The mainstream media won't tell you how close Britain is to a constitutional meltdown, but we will. Hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we reveal the leaked emails that could finish Starmer for good. And as dawn breaks over Westminster this morning, the sense of crisis has only deepened. Senior civil servants describe a government barely functioning, paralysed by fear of what comes next. Emergency meetings are being held back-to-back, not to govern, but to survive. Officials are no longer asking how to fix the problem, but how long the Prime Minister has left. One senior aide, speaking off the record, admitted, "We're no longer in damage control, we're in endgame management." Overnight, pressure from within Labour intensified dramatically. Backbench MPS, many of whom had remained loyal through previous scandals, are now breaking ranks. Constituency offices have been flooded with angry calls and emails from veterans' families, pensioners and lifelong Labour supporters who say they feel betrayed. One MP from the Midlands described receiving more than 600 emails in a single night, nearly all demanding Starmer reverse the cuts or resign. "I've never seen anything like this," the MP said. "Not during Iraq, not during Brexit. This is different. This is moral outrage." Unions, traditionally Labour's backbone, are also beginning to turn. A joint statement from 3 major public sector unions stopped short of calling for Starmer's resignation, but condemned the veterans' cuts as morally indefensible and a fundamental breach of Labour's historic duty to those who serve. That language alone has sent shockwaves through party headquarters. When unions start publicly distancing themselves, it signals something far more serious than a temporary rebellion. At the same time, veterans' charities are escalating their response. The Royal British Legion announced an emergency meeting of its board, with sources confirming that a public intervention is imminent. One charity executive said privately, "If the government does not reverse course immediately, we will have no choice but to speak out. Silence is no longer an option. Such a move would be devastating." The Legion is one of the most respected institutions in the country, and its condemnation would further isolate Starmer from the public. International reaction is also beginning to surface. Diplomatic sources confirm that several allied governments have expressed quiet concern about political stability in the UK. One European diplomat described the situation as extraordinary, noting that it is almost unheard of for a modern British monarch and government to be so openly at odds. Markets are watching closely. Analysts warn that if the crisis drags on, further currency volatility and investment pullbacks are likely. Behind palace walls, the mood is said to be resolute. Sources close to Prince William insist he has no regrets and believes his intervention was necessary. He sees this as a line in the sand, one aide said. "This is about values, not politics." The Prince is reportedly being briefed daily on the situation facing homeless veterans, with particular focus on housing evictions scheduled for the coming weeks. Several planned engagements have been quietly adjusted, fueling speculation that another high-profile appearance is imminent. King Charles, meanwhile, is said to be deeply concerned about the long-term constitutional implications, but equally determined not to retreat. Insiders describe him as calm but firm, convinced that the monarchy's moral authority is at stake. He believes that silence in the face of injustice would be the real constitutional breach, said one source familiar with the King's thinking. Inside Labour HQ, the atmosphere is described as toxic. Staffers are divided into camps, those still hoping Starmer can survive with a dramatic U-turn, and those already preparing for a leadership transition. Draft speeches, contingency statements, and emergency policy reversals are reportedly circulating. Yet every hour that passes without decisive action only worsens the damage. The sense of drift is becoming impossible to ignore. Political historians are already drawing comparisons to the darkest chapters of modern British politics. Some argue this moment could redefine the relationship between the monarchy and elected government for a generation. Others warn that if mishandled, it could permanently erode trust in democratic leadership. What is clear is that Britain has entered uncharted territory where long-standing conventions are being tested under unprecedented pressure. And now, all eyes turn to the next 48 hours. Will Starmer reverse the cuts and attempt a humiliating climb down? Will he apologise publicly to veterans and the royal family, or will he dig in, risking outright defeat in Parliament and the collapse of his leadership? Every option carries enormous consequences, not just for one man or one party, but for the country itself. One veteran standing outside Downing Street last night summed it up bluntly, his medals clutched in shaking hands. "This isn't about left or right anymore," he said. "This is about whether this country still remembers who stood up for it when it mattered." Britain is holding its breath. History is moving fast, and by the end of this week, the political landscape could look unrecognisable. As night fell again over the capital, the gravity of the moment settled in. The protests outside Westminster did not disperse, they hardened. Tents appeared. Veterans wrapped in old regimental jackets shared flasks of tea, refusing to leave until they were heard. Handwritten signs lined the railings. "We served, why won't you?" And honour isn't optional. Police maintained a visible but restrained presence, aware that any heavy-handed response would only inflame public anger further. This was no longer a protest driven by party politics. It had become a moral reckoning. Inside Parliament, MPs described an eerie quiet, punctuated by frantic phone calls. Senior figures who had survived decades in politics admitted privately that they had never seen a Prime Minister so isolated so quickly. Former allies avoided eye contact in the corridors. Long-time supporters declined to return calls. One veteran MP said bluntly, "This feels like the moment the ground gives way beneath you and you realise there's nothing left to stand on." Media coverage intensified hour by hour. Rolling news channels abandoned normal programming. Panels of constitutional experts debated whether the monarchy's intervention marked a turning point in British governance. Legal scholars argued late into the night about precedent, responsibility, and restraint. But among the public, those debates felt distant. What mattered was simpler. Veterans were suffering and the country could no longer look away. By early morning, leaked polling from marginal constituencies sent shockwaves through Labour headquarters. Focus groups showed not anger alone, but something far worse, contempt. Voters described Starmer as out of touch, cold and arrogant. Several said they felt personally insulted by the suggestion that fiscal discipline required cutting support for veterans while increasing spending elsewhere. One undecided voter summed it up starkly: "You can forgive mistakes, you don't forgive disrespect." Rumours began circulating that emergency talks were underway between senior Labour figures and veterans representatives, but without Starmer present. That absence spoke volumes. It suggested that the party itself was beginning to plan for a future without him, quietly attempting to rebuild bridges he had burned. Meanwhile, senior civil servants reportedly drafted contingency plans for a leadership transition, including timelines for a caretaker prime minister, should events spiral further. In the background, another clock was ticking. Local councils across the country warned that eviction notices for veterans were already in motion and could not simply be paused without ministerial approval. Each day of delay meant more men and women forced out onto the streets. The human cost was no longer hypothetical. It was imminent. Palace watchers noted a subtle but significant change in royal scheduling. Prince William's diary for the coming week suddenly included visits described only as community engagements. No locations were listed. That ambiguity was deliberate. It kept Downing Street guessing and amplified pressure without a single word being spoken. As one former royal aide explained, "Sometimes the silence is the loudest message of all." By mid-morning, foreign press outlets joined the frenzy. Headlines across Europe and North America spoke of a British constitutional crisis and a government at war with its own traditions. Investors remained jittery. Business leaders quietly urged stability, but even they acknowledged that credibility, once lost, is not easily restored. Britain's image as a steady, predictable democracy was taking visible damage. Within Labour, the fault lines widened further. MPs who had once dismissed internal critics as disloyal now found themselves isolated. Private meetings turned heated, accusations flew. Some demanded an immediate reversal of policy, others argued it was already too late. The most brutal assessment came from a senior strategist who reportedly said, "This isn't about saving the government anymore, it's about limiting how much of it burns down." And still from number 10, there was no decisive response. No apology. No reversal. Just carefully worded statements that satisfied no one. That vacuum of leadership became the story itself. In politics, hesitation can be fatal, and Starmer's silence was interpreted not as caution, but as contempt. Outside Westminster, the crowd grew again as evening approached. More veterans arrived, families joined them. Strangers brought food, blankets and candles. The mood was sombre, resolute and unyielding. Chants echoed through Whitehall. Not angry, but mournful, as if the nation itself were grieving a loss of trust. Britain now stands at a crossroads. One path leads to reconciliation, humility and repair. The other leads to collapse, recrimination, and a Prime Minister remembered not for what he stood for, but for what he failed to defend. The next move will define not just a career, but a chapter in British history. And the question hanging over Westminster tonight is unavoidable. When history looks back on this moment, will it say that Britain chose honour or that it hesitated until it was too late? As the third day of the crisis unfolds, exhaustion is beginning to show on every face in Westminster. MPS arrive early and leave late, running on caffeine and anxiety, knowing that each hour without resolution deepens the damage. Senior party figures privately admit that this is no longer a scandal that can be spun away. It has become a defining moral test, and failing it carries consequences that no reshuffle or press statement can fix. Behind closed doors, pressure on Starmer has reportedly reached breaking point. Multiple sources claim he has been urged by senior colleagues to issue a full public apology, not only to veterans but to the country, and to announce an immediate reversal of the cuts. The advice is blunt: act now or lose everything. Yet even allies concede that any U-turn would come at a terrible cost, exposing a leader forced into retreat by the monarchy, public outrage and his own MPS. For a Prime Minister who built his image on competence and control, the humiliation would be profound.